everybody to the third session of the Enterprise Service Management track on this year's DWW. Prior heading over to Silke Henderson-Stuenkel, for the IBM Compliance and how to avoid ILMT traps, I want to do some little housekeeping. So all of you are muted. You will as well receive the recording afterwards after the DWW. And please keep your questions, ask them at the very end of the day when we do run our community track, which is actually and specially meant for all your questions for interactions with the Matrix42 product management. So Silke will be there, I will be there. We had Paul beforehand and all the other guys who are still coming. All of them will join at the end of the day. And that's it actually from me. We have overall 30 minutes. Silke will kind of talk through it 25 minutes, then she will get the final notice from my end to allow you as well to get a bio break, refresh your coffee cups, and be ready for the next session. That said, Silke, stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Klaus. Welcome everyone to the session IBM Compliance and how to avoid ILMT traps. My name is Silke Henderson-Stuenkel. I'm a senior product manager within Matrix42, and I'm really passionate about discovery and inventory solutions. I did have different roles in product development and consulting, but I really have to say this, I have a passion for the big data center software vendors like IBM and especially Oracle. So today, what's on the agenda? I would like to go with you through a few of the challenges with IBM license management and especially with ILMT. So why should someone use ILMT at all? And then for the ones of you who are not that familiar with ILMT and some of the wordings, a little excursion to ILMT architecture and full versus subcapacity license measurements. And then the most important things, ILMT traps, what to look for, and a few checklists. And a little short overview or teaser of the Matrix42 IBM Compliance add-on. That being said, let's get started. So what are some of the typical challenges with IBM license management and the usage of ILMT? So IBM has many products, editions, versions, and lots of different license metrics. Within ILMT, there's a poor overview about the savings potentials of licenses. And the license information are often not complete or not that reliable. A very important thing and a huge challenge for most of the customers is actually that ILMT doesn't have any information about the systems which have IBM software deployed, but do not have an ILMT agent deployed, and therefore cannot report any data into ILMT, or are basically or simply just not configured correctly within ILMT. So that's a huge issue for many customers, as ILMT only knows what it knows or sees what it sees. Furthermore, there's no indication or warning when the last required audit snapshot within ILMT was taken. And there is no insights about the actual license usage, as ILMT only sees the, let's say, discovered data, and it can see which installation, it actually does see the software installation, but it doesn't have any information about license usage rights. What did a customer purchase? So therefore, no compliance overview or status. Let me just say this very clearly. ILMT is a great tool, but to rely exclusively on ILMT is not advisable. So why should someone use ILMT? The most common reason why a customer is using ILMT is because the customer wants to make use of the subcapacity measurements to save on costs. But then the ILMT usage is mandatory for products where you can measure subcapacity like PVU, RVU, VPC, etc. And this is stated very clearly in the IBM passport agreements, that this mandatory usage of ILMT is a client reporting responsibility. There are some exemptions though. So ILMT is not required for smaller environments, or so for if a customer has fewer than 1,000 employees and contractors, and the client is not a service provider or did not outsource or contract with a service provider. And this is very important, it's always, that's an and clause, and the total physical capacity of the full capacity server cores is less than 1,000 PVUs. Although you want to make usage of subcapacity, but to go for this exemption, you need to calculate the full capacity. If it's less than 1,000 PVUs, you have less than 1,000 employees, etc., then you're not required to make use of ILMT. If ILMT does not provide any support for the virtualization technology you are using, or if the product cannot be licensed or cannot be measured by subcapacity, then you also do not have to make use of ILMT. And very simply, if you do not want to make use of the subcapacity measurements, so if you want to go for full capacity, of course, then you don't need to use it either. IBM, as I already mentioned, states this very clearly in the IBM passport agreements. In the section 114, there's lots about the client reporting responsibilities stated. Let's take a closer look into these. So you need to make sure that the installation and configuration of the latest ILMT is in place. You need to apply all fixes, patches, modifications, and updates to ILMT. This is very important for, especially also for the software catalog and the PVU tables. Then, huge struggle for a lot of customers, deploy within 90 days of the first subcapacity-based product deployment. You need to deploy ILMT and the ILMT, or better big fix, I'll come to that later, agents. And all the systems need to collect the data and they need to be reported within ILMT. So all the data needs to be collected over all of the systems. But don't forget, if it's a virtualized system, you need to have the complete virtualization hierarchy within ILMT, and all the data need to be within ILMT about this so-called VM managers too. Once this is all in place, you need to analyze, reconcile, and create all the reports to make sure that you meet the compliance standards. So what does that mean? There is the requirement that you at least generate audit snapshots at least once a quarter, and that you provide a seamless documentation of all these audit snapshots and archive them for 2 years. In case of an audit, IBM has the right to take a look into these data for the last 2 years. A little bit about the ILMT architecture and full and subcapacity. So when we are here, the main tool, so ILMT the reports, the big fix client. Furthermore, you do have in Big Fix a console to manage all these clients and to gather a few of the web reports. But most important is, after Big Fix is installed and configured, you also need to deploy the ILMT server. And within the ILMT server, using the web user interface, you create the reports and also the audit snapshots. Again, ILMT does only see software installations, but has no knowledge about the license usage rights. It doesn't have any commercial data. Speaking of FullCapacity SubCapacity now, to bring a little light in here for the ones not that familiar with the terms, it's FullCapacity basically means you take a look into the scope on how to calculate the required licenses or PVUs, for example. So FullCapacity means all activated processor cores are taken into account, which is really cool that it's only the activated processor cores. Other big vendors, they go for all the cores. But assume that you have a virtualized infrastructure and you only have a portion of these physical cores being used by a virtual machine which has IBM software in place, then SubCapacity means that you're able to only calculate using the cores within this virtual machines or machine. This as a little example here, there's one server with 8 physical cores and 8 virtual cores. It's split into 2 VMs. First VM has MQ software installed and web application server and uses 4 virtual cores. The other virtual machine only has MQ installed, also uses 4 virtual cores of the physical system. Total physical cores is 8. So from a licensing perspective, how does it look like? How many cores do I have to license now? For MQ, MQ is deployed on both of the virtual machines. If you go for FullCapacity, you have to, there would be 8 cores to be licensed. If you make use of virtualization capacity, SubCapacity, it's also 8 cores. Because, see, both of the virtual machines each use 4 cores. But for web application server, now here it makes sense to use SubCapacity because only one of the virtual machines has it installed. So therefore, it's only 4 cores to license and not with FullCapacity, the 8 physical server cores. We're moving to the ILMT traps, what to look for and a checklist. So as a customer, to make sure that I don't run into any compliance issues or issues within an audit, I need to take a look into these points. I need to make sure that the ILMT version is accurate, the PVU software catalogs are up to date, all agents deployed in the complete scope, and are the agents reporting correctly? Are the so-called VM managers working correctly? VM managers are usually the host of a virtual machine, like for example, Hyper-V, it would be the Hyper-V host, or it could also be the ESX server, but in that case, the vCenter is being queried. So this is all being put into the wording VM managers. Are they all working correctly? Very important, a very big thing. How are the decommissioned servers being handled? And then are the server categories handled correctly? How's product bundling being implemented? Are there any calls open with IBM regarding ILMT or BigFix actually? Is there any process implemented for generation of the quarterly audit snapshots? And last but not least, always check the compliance status. So, checklist, ILMT version up to date. As I already said, always the latest and greatest version of ILMT needs to be in place. Otherwise, some compliance gaps, it can be really difficult to negotiate and defend them within an audit situation with IBM. Is the PVU and software catalog up to date? What happens when it's not up to date is that the generated audit snapshots might not be accepted by IBM. There is the possibility to configure automatic updates within ILMT. If your company policies allow that, make use of it. Are the agents deployed on all relevant servers? That's a huge issue, to get an overview about the deployment state. There is the rule, 90 days within the product use, the systems need to report the data into ILMT. But how do you know that all the agents are deployed when ILMT only sees the systems or agents where it is already deployed? Well, use your CMDB or, for example, use Matrix42 IBM Compliance. Matrix42 IBM Compliance has other inventory sources like server inventory, for example, which would be able or is able to gather the data. Are all the ILMT agents reporting correctly? It is kind of normal that sometimes a system is not reachable or has a change or whatever happens. So there is a certain percentage is okay, but it shouldn't be exceeded. And so a strong recommendation is always to, in time, address any issues with that. Are the VM managers working correctly? If the virtualization data is incomplete, what will happen then is that instead of taking the actual PVU value from these specific CPUs, a default, much higher PVU value is being applied by IBM. That would really be a pity to miss that. So any issues here, check and address immediately. Decommissioned servers. There's lots of savings potential here, or to avoid over-reporting. You decommission a server, but when this is not handled correctly in BigFix, and BigFix will keep reporting these decommissioned servers into ILMT, and therefore license requirements will still be reported. So possible actions, you can remove the inactive servers within BigFix to reflect the changes in ILMT. There is an automation possible within BigFix, but for some companies or company policies, it is not possible to apply this within BigFix, so automatic decommissioning. But then what you would have to do then is to enable it within ILMT. Are the server categories handled correctly? What does that mean? By default, ILMT always assumes a production status for all of the servers, and therefore software instances installed. But not all the servers are productive. Think of data or disaster recovery areas where you might not even need a license, or think of development instances where you might need a different license. And to avoid over-reporting, you need to take this into account. How is the product bundling being implemented? For example, if you have a software installation of a certain product, but you purchased already another product bundle from IBM. So if you apply the automatic bundling rules from ILMT, it will end up with generating a wrong or a different license requirements and license usages. So there's a lot of work to do there, yes. But it's very important to do that work, to take care of the correct product bundling and make the correct assignments for the software components to reduce software costs. Before you generate the audit snapshots, make sure that you do not have any calls open with IBM support, or actually even better, have a problem management report available for any of the big fix in ILMT issues and store it with the audit snapshot. Speaking of the audit snapshot, is the process working? It's a must-have, those quarterly generated audit snapshots, and to retain them for 2 years. ILMT, unfortunately, doesn't provide any reminder or automation to support in any form with this requirement. So you cannot see within ILMT when was the last audit snapshot being generated. And there's often a disconnection between ILMT administration and SAM team. Sometimes the SAM team doesn't have any access to the ILMT server, et cetera, et cetera. So that results in an audit snapshot not being run regularly. So there's always the recommendation to implement a process, like, for example, a procedure like regular audit tasks, which would include checklists. And out of these checklists, further actions could be taken, like generation of incidents if there are any gaps found. Last but not least, always check your compliance status. ILMT does not have the knowledge, but SAM tools should have the knowledge, like Matrix42 IBM Compliance. So therefore, or then you are able to address those license shortfalls in time. Having all that said, would it be kind of nice to know where the ILMT or better big fix agents would need to be deployed? And to have that kind of transparency of unused licenses, or to be able to address compliance issues in time. With Matrix42 IBM Compliance, it is available as an add-on since a couple of months at the marketplace, and we did implement a few of the use cases. So you can see here, what did we do? We implemented a data provider into ILMT. So if you have, take a look at this first use case. You want to get an overview about ILMT deployment. You want to make sure that all the agents are there where they need to be. And you want to be sure and confident that you are able to address health issues and subcapacity risks. So deploy the data provider ILMT, comes with the IBM compliance add-on, configure it, and then start the data collection. The data collection uses ILMT's API. So we are not looking into don't query the database at all. We are only using ILMT's API, and all the licensing relevant system and software information is being collected. After that has been run, you can navigate to the license app, and there is you will find an ILMT health check dashboard, which will give you an overview about all the missing ILMT agents and systems, and a transparency over information scan issues. And in the end, you should be more confident with your ILMT deployment, or at least being able to mitigate any of the subcapacity risks. How does it look like in the software? You can see here, that's a little screenshot of IBM Compliance and the navigation ILMT health check. You see here the first chart with the ILMT agent deployment issues. This derives from the Matrix42 other inventory sources or inventory scans. And you see here missing systems missing an ILMT, without ILMT agents at all. And you have here further charts which deal with ILMT agent health issues, software scan health, problems, what you can't see here anymore, problems with the ILMT managers, problems with, or is there any product re-aggregation needed? Another use case You might want to identify saving potentials and ensure your compliance. If you add the licenses which you purchased or you own, or license usage rights, let's call it that way, into the Matrix42 system, configure the data provider ILMT, and then navigate to the IBM Compliance navigation item, you'll find on the landing page a tile with products out of compliance. And there, a list of all the incompliant products and how many license requirements there are will be presented. Or you'll find the unused licenses, a list with all the licenses where there are unused usage rights. So overall, you're able to gain a lot of transparency about license shortfalls or unused IBM licenses. I just mentioned the landing page, which you can see right here. This is the landing page with all kinds of tiles, products out of compliance, compliant products, unused licenses. Once you click on one of these tiles, a more detailed view will pop up and will provide you with all the necessary information. You can see this little guy here. This is a little helper to remind you on your last audit snapshot. Unfortunately, ILMT API does not provide external access for the audit snapshots. Otherwise, we would have implemented, for example, something like to trigger the audit snapshots or to gather any information about when was the last audit snapshot. So what we implemented here is a little helper function. You are able to determine here or to put in here manually when was the last audit snapshot being taken. And this traffic light has a rule implemented, a warning function, and you can always see that.
Okay, Silke, unfortunately, I need to jump into your really interesting presentation because we are running out of time already. Only
That's
have
fine.
3 minutes again. And I'll just give you the compliance at a glance. Just you will receive anyway the recording afterwards. If you missed something, if you do have the questions, kind of really highlight our community track session at 3 p.m. Join us there, or even go ahead and join the SAM experts talk right in the next session where Silke is as well part of. Looking forward to meet you in there and looking forward to all of your questions on the community track. And thanks Silke again for those deep insights into all the IBM complex stuff and the ILMT. Thank you and see you later.